All right. Well, welcome to Bigger Truth Media. I am Scott McMahon. We have Stephanie Boone, Cindy Alberta, and Tom Nemcek with us today. And we are talking about Kent County. And the reason why we're doing this today, and we just kind of scheduled this yesterday, is really because of this. There's a meeting this evening to discuss these bylaws, and we're going to start by just kind of reading some of this, and we will discuss it further, and we're going to discuss the backstory behind this. I think that Kent County is a really important county. It's Grand Rapids, and it's also considered one of the bellwether counties, and both for the state and the country. The way that Kent County goes, the whole country and the whole state tends to go, because it has a very representative population of the entire country. It's a pretty evenly divided in terms of right left, politics, and it's also, even economically, it's pretty representative of the whole country. Would you guys agree with that statement? Do you think I'm on?
I would.
Okay. And so I think because of that, Kent County gets a lot of attention from the left. I've read that there's a lot of there's a lot of energy that goes into Kent County and wanting to win Kent County, and there's also been a lot of attention in this operation to infiltrate the grassroots. And Kent County's GOP is very much controlled, as we will see, by the disruptors, and they overtly engage in these disruptor Saul Alinsky type tactics, and we'll discuss that at length there. So if you're joining us just now, thank you so much for joining us. Please bring your questions and your comments, and we'd love to respond. Right now, let's go ahead and read this little section of the bylaws. So this is page 7 of the bylaws, and it's talking about standards of conduct. And if these standards are violated, then that would be good cause for removal. And they've already, as we'll talk about, they've already engaged in plenty of removal of delegates for even just for voicing opinions that they don't like. So but this one on F right here, I highlighted it. Refrain from disparaging comments criticizing the voice of the majority in public, even when members voted in opposition. So, if you voted in opposition, you better keep your opinions to yourself when you're speaking in public. Respectful opposition is overshadowed and discounted when disparaging comments are made in public. Communicating publicly in a negative manner about the actions taken by the EC officers or members affects outside interest and participation in the Kent County GOP. All media communications, events, speaking opportunities, and social media platform posts are considered public. So there's this public face and there's this private face. And so they do not want anyone speaking in public about what's going on in the meetings. So that's even further support in G here. Support the work of the standing committees in public and avoid public criticism, disparaging character comments in public, and communicating in a way that negatively affects growth. So growth, participation, or momentum. And that is, of course, of the party that is the faction of the party that's in control. They want absolute control, and they are obviously, as we've seen repeatedly, they are very much interested in the narrative that people believe about them. Laura say, "Yikes! No dissenting opinions." That is right. So then H, I found interesting also. Guests, precinct delegates, and EC members are prohibited from audio and or video recording the EC business meetings and standing committee meetings. So they don't like transparency also, and we're going to talk a lot more about that. So with that, so the Stephanie, you and that G especially, or that H, that last one, or whichever one it was, that really referred specifically to you, right? Because you've been recording, just doing audio recordings of the meetings for how long now?
Well, can you hear me okay, first of all?
Absolutely, yes.
I learned to record meetings actually to attend school board meetings and county commission meetings starting back in 2020 when I would look at the minutes after a meeting that took place after earned citizens.
Stephanie, you're going in and out. You're cutting in and out. We're kind of every other word.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
That's better.
So far,
Okay. All right. So basically, I learned that that the minutes from the meetings, where sometimes hundreds of parents would show up or concerned citizens to voice their concerns, and I would look through the minutes and see that they did not reflect what actually happened or what was said at a meeting, not even close. There would be, data and facts presented, and none of that was considered. So I learned to record meetings, sometimes video, sometimes audio, just for accountability, because there were times where I would go back and listen, and what I remembered happened was not, in fact, what happened. So sometimes we, have a tendency to embellish things or make things sound better or worse for certain scenarios. So for all of us, just for accountability, I felt like, that is just a responsible thing to do. And as the party of truth and transparency, law and order, you would think that it would just make sense that no one would have a problem with that. But what I found with school boards, county commissioners, and now with even our own Republican Party is that when you actually take those recordings and try to present those back to those people, first of all, they don't want to see or listen to their own voices. And second of all, when you do point that out, you're the bad guy. There's no interest in talking about what was actually said. In fact, our secretary of the Kent GOP has told me flat out, I don't care what your recording says. That is not what's in the minutes, so we don't care.
Yeah. Believe us, don't believe your lying ears.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So Jason says, yeah, they them don't like that. Yeah, they're not showing themselves to be on the left at all, are they? So so what things escalated recently because they knew that you were recording, and you haven't really shared your recordings publicly, right?
I think the last public recording I shared related to the Republican Party was this past August, I think it was, or September. We had a meeting at one of the members' homes to try to hash out the election of the chair and vice chair of the Kent EC. So no, and in fact, these people would have no idea whether I am recording or anyone else in the room, unless they're going to confiscate phones and look at, recording devices. What are they going to strip search everyone? They have no idea who may or may not be recording. And it's my legal right to do that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's a question here. Marta says, are there meetings, open meetings? And so that this is, the Republican Party is a private organization. It's not a government organization. And so, open meeting law does not, the Open Meeting Act does not apply to the Republican Party meetings. I'm correct in that, right?
That's correct. Yep.
Yeah. So,
that being said, though, Scott,
yeah,
the meetings have all, most of them have been open to at least the precinct delegates. If you look on the announcements on social media, on their website, they all say that precinct delegates are encouraged to attend. So it's been kind of interesting. Now, there's been times they've taken votes to exclude the public and make the meetings private. 3rd District took a vote recently to completely make the meeting's private. So no one from the public, no one is allowed to attend unless you're a member.
That is just crazy, because these, they also talk about how, the delegates are more informed than the people. And they talk often about how the delegates are the people's elected representation within the party. And yet they are not allowing the public to know what's going on in the meetings and how their supposed representation is representing them. And so this is an absolutely tyrannical approach.
It is. It's
I will say, sorry, Steph.
No,
I will say that actually has been one of the biggest complaints that we've heard in Kent County from the precinct delegates, is that they have not been informed of anything going on. They were kind of shocked when they started to come to these executive committee meetings and saw and witnessed firsthand what was going on, and they were like, no one ever told me any of this was going on.
Right.
And it's kind of embarrassing, to be honest with you.
This is really, it's so reminiscent of what I've read about the how Mao took over in China, and also the Bolshevik Revolution. They say power to the people. They say, it's all, we the people, but they exclude the people. They don't want the voters or the people to know anything about what they're doing. They want, and they want absolute control over the narrative.
So I will offer, and confirm what Stephanie said. When I was elected as treasurer back in January or December of last year, I sent out an email basically saying, look, I'm committed to honesty, integrity, and transparency. And I have stood by that the entire time I've been on the executive committee. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, there are people who, I really disappointed in some people who I thought were committed to our constitutional values of the First Amendment and free speech, and to see this kind of totalitarianism, Marxism, whatever you want to call it, is such a disappointment to me. It's sad. And, I tie a lot of this back to our former chair who resigned August 10th. He has been heavily involved with the Karamo administration. Our former vice chair actually was the secretary and may or may not still be the secretary of the MIGOP, which she kept very secret, by the way, for a couple of months while she was still our vice chair, and trying to implement a lot of the policies that were wanted from the MIGOP from top down. I found out that she was actually the secretary of the MIGOP through the grapevine. And I thought, well, that's interesting. How can she serve both the state party as well as the local party? And that's one thing you're going to find out, Scott, is a lot of the same people, and Cindy can speak to this as well. Same people in Kent County GOP are the same people on the District 3 committee as well.
Mm-hmm. So and who was the chair and who is the chair now?
So Tim Wallinger was the chair up until August 10th when he resigned. We were actually in a crisis mode in August, so I tried to organize a unity meeting with all of the executive committee, including the statutory members, which, by the way, our unduly elected vice chair basically made up MCL to say that statutory members are not allowed to vote on removing members, which is funny. They took MCL 168599, which says that if there is a vacancy, that the elected members, not statutory members, will vote to fill those seats. Well, the problem with that is that, as we know from many court cases, started with Heitmanis, that the party bylaws, the MRP bylaws, actually supersede MCL. So the party bylaws say that all executive committee members, including statutory, are to vote on filling those seats. Well, there was huge uproar in Kent County GOP about that. They did not want the statutory members to vote on filling executive committee seats. And then they took that and twisted and said, well, they can't vote on removing members either from the EC because of 168599. Well, nowhere in 168599 does it say that. But our illegitimately elected vice chair, and we can talk about that in a minute, basically cited that as the reason that the statutory members are not allowed to vote. And they basically have alienated all the statutory members, which is really, really sad, because I tried to unite them on August 15th, and they rejected that outright.
Right. So statutory members, so for those who may not know, are those who are elected to office. And so because they're elected to office, they don't need to be a delegate in order to be a member of the party. Is that correct?
Sort of. So they could be elected, or they could have run as Republicans and lost their race to a Democrat, but they were still on the ballot as a Republican.
Right.
Correct.
So Joe Brandis has a really good point, and I probably should have started with this. What are the backgrounds of the guests with Kent GOP? So what are your positions, or what positions have you held in the past within the GOP, the county party?
I'm sorry. I'll go first. I was elected as the treasurer. I've been on the executive committee from day one since we took over, if you will, the Kent County GOP. I'll let Stephanie follow.
I basically, I ran for Kent County Commissioner back in 2022. And have been extremely active in local school boards and fighting back with parent groups with the schools. I had spearheaded 2 different efforts to recall school board members in Forest Hills schools and Lowell schools. So I kind of went from being a zero to a hero, you would say, very quickly with the amount of activism that I was involved in. I saw the need to get involved in politics very early on when I was dealing with these school boards and boards of commissioners, because I felt like, well, okay, if you elected representatives who call yourselves Republicans or claim that you are concerned parents in the schools are not going to stand for what we all know is right, then I guess it means I need to get involved. And very quickly, I was, I'm a precinct delegate. I did win my race for that. I lost the race in the primaries to an establishment Republican for county commissioner, but got elected. I mean, I don't even think there was a question onto the Kent GOP EC. It very quickly was asked to also be on the 3rd District EC. All new for me. I'd never done any of this before, but I was just as excited as everyone else that we had a grassroots takeover. We were going to make changes in our counties, in our district, in the world, right? And then very, very quickly found out that when you ask questions, that's not a welcome thing. I saw the connect.
Not welcome to the people that are in power of the party.
Correct. So so that's what I did. I had a pretty short stint, almost 1 year to the day. I grew a pair and decided to ask a question at a Kent GOP EC meeting about money, about spending, because we had only one standing rule that we had voted on as a committee for the Kent GOP, and it was that not more than, I believe it was $2,500 was to be spent in between meetings without approval from the entire committee. And about a year ago, last March, I had found out when I was also the local watchdog subcommittee chair. I mean, I was literally asked to be a leader. I was a leader. And Tim walked into a subcommittee chair meeting, Tim Wallinga, the past chair, and he was very excited about announcing the speaker contract for the Lincoln Day dinner. But the problem was someone had asked him what was the contract amount, and he said that it was for $17,000. And the contract had already been signed, and I just had questions about that because I knew that we didn't have any bylaws, but we had one standing rule, and it was spending, and it wasn't supposed to be more than $2,500. So yeah, I grew a pair last March. I asked a question, and that for me is what has snowballed all of this. Is I learned so quickly the connections between Kent that spilled over into 3rd District very quickly. I was shunned. I was toxic. I was a threat. I was everything under the sun. And so that's my history. Between last March and I think I probably broke the record because I got voted off the 3rd District 2 times. The first time was done illegitimately. So then they turned around, reinstated me because I had to have an attorney let them know that they had done it illegitimately. The very next meeting, they reinstated me. Then they voted to remove Robert's rules and change the rules so that they could do it legitimately and got rid of me again. And then the very next meeting at Kent GOP, I was removed as well. So that's all. I don't even know. It was by November, I was back to being a zero in terms of the Republican Party.
So yeah, I just wanted to bring these comments to attention. So Laura Williams says Steph has been a huge advocate for students. And Randy Guppy says, "How dare you ask questions? You are removed." For Bolton.
I want to add one clarification. So the one standing rule we voted on February 27th, 2023 was regarding spending. Actually, interestingly enough, the MIGOP secretary, Angela Gillespie, was actually our vice chair, and she was also appointed by the former chair to be the chair of the policy subcommittee writing bylaws. She brought on February 27th, I believe, 6 different items that she wanted us to vote on and pass, which none of us had seen actually, and which is pretty standard nowadays. None of us had seen these proposals for standing rules, and so we shot down all of them except for one, which we amended, which was that no spending could occur. And I had actually brought this to the attention of the former chair, Tim Wallinga, back on February 10th or 9th, I believe. And I said, look, I can't spend money without the approval of the body, the executive committee. That is in Robert's rules, okay? That we needed a motion to approve any spending for the treasurer as an acting treasurer. And of course, his response back to me is, well, you've been spending money under my authority. And I said, well, that's not how this works. We work for the executive committee. And it's sad that I was like one of the only people on one of the only officers who understood that I work for the executive committee. I don't work for Tim Wallinga as the former chair. I didn't work for the secretary. I didn't work for the vice chair. I worked for the executive committee, and I recognized that very early on. And I said, no, we need a motion to approve me to spend this. And I even recommended, I said, we can make this something as easy as, up to $1,000 without approval of the executive committee. That was my actual suggestion. So we ended up on February 27th with a rule that said, without the approval of the chair and the treasurer, we cannot spend over $2,500 without the approval of the executive committee. And that was the rule that we went by. Interestingly enough, that until that rule had to be suspended a couple of times on spending that the former chair had engaged in without approval. I was actually appointed the chair of the Budget and Finance Subcommittee, and I immediately went to work instituting a process to track spending, because without rules for spending, you can't organize a body like this. People will just want money and or spend money and not get approval on it. So I instituted what I call the request for funds page, worked with my subcommittee. We developed a form. You submitted that form to me. I would present it to the chair for approval. If we both agreed on it, we would go ahead and process that. Again, checking our finances to make sure we had sufficient money to cover those things.
Good. So let's see. Rayanne says, Stephanie, you could never be a zero. These people are insane. You are such a warrior. Now, Cindy, I want to hear your story. So please tell us your background with the party and the district in
So,
D3.
yeah, so I started up right during all of the COVID craziness and everything, taking more of an interest in what was happening all around in our world. I ended up doing a biblical citizenship class with some friends and some church mates of mine. And we got really pumped up and really wanted to be a part of things and figure out how we could help. Shortly after that, we started a group, an informative type of group, which we really wanted to center around prayer, different than all of the other groups around town, like stand up and things like that. We just wanted to be different than that and just providing information and to be very prayerful about everything that we did. And coming out of that, that's actually where I learned about the precinct delegate openings, because somebody had come and had asked for signups for that. Didn't know a whole lot about it, so I jumped right in, of course, and said, great, how can I help? There's an open spot, fantastic. So ran that race. I did not actually win the elected race. There was some very funny business with the votes that happened that day in the way that the person who was chosen and who was elected into that position, no one had ever heard of him. He hadn't shown up anywhere, so that was an interesting thing. We finally did manage to get a hold of him, and he did resign his spot, and I was elected to that precinct delegate spot at the Kent County meeting. So ever since then, just trying to help out and get involved wherever I can. I started to work on the subcommittees, like in the PR subcommittee for public relations, doing editing, and wanted to be involved in everything that I could. There was an opening for District 3 when we were coming up on the convention for that and voting in District 3 Executive Committee. And I agreed. I was asked to be on that, which was a slate at the time. And right around that time, just after that is when I started to understand the problem with slates. And I feel terrible that I went into blindly promoting and being a part of the whole voting of slates. I would never do that again. I think everyone needs to stand on their own merit. So it's been a learning curve. But ever since District 3 and being voted on there, my mission and my goal was just to find out more information. There was such a lack of communication in the party as a whole, and I did not feel equipped as a precinct delegate in order to inform the rest of my community. And I'm involved in my community and in my precinct, and I try to bring all the information I can to them to help them understand it better. So I needed to understand it better, and there wasn't a real source where I could go to get my questions answered. So I just started to dig and hunt for myself. There was a Robert's Rules class that came up, and I thought this is fantastic because all of the meetings they run on this. So I have to know it. So I joined this Robert's Rules class. There was a lot of pushback on that because of who was running the class at the time. There was a lot of don't go to that class. This person can't be trusted. Things
That
like
was
that.
J.D.
And
That was J.D. Glasser, right?
yes,
Yeah.
it was. And because there was a lot of pushback, I just became a little bit more interested. I'm like, well, why on earth wouldn't you want me to learn the rules? I mean, these are the rules we're supposed to be using at the meeting, are they not? And it just didn't make a lot of sense to me. So I did it anyway. And when I came back out of it, I encouraged other delegates to go and to learn about this. If you ever have a chance, this class was great. It was very helpful to me. I now understand what's happening in meetings. I understand how I can participate, and I would promote it, and I would tell people this has been really great. But they didn't like that. And when I say they, this was at the time when I was on the Michigan Precinct First chat, and they did not like that. So posts got deleted. Anyone who was speaking out for that and trying to promote the learning of Robert's Rules, that was very hush hush, poo poo. Don't talk about that. And shortly after that, I actually was taken off the chat. I was I was booted out of that chat, as well as many others. But when I started to question, and here's where things got really interesting and where they started for me, is when I started to question what was happening at the Kent EC meetings, because as a precinct delegate, I want to attend all of the meetings so I can be informed and pass that information along. And I started to pay attention to the things happening or not happening in this case, and became very frustrated with what I was seeing out of our chair. And this was our former chair, Tim Wallinga, at the time. And nothing against him personally or anything. I just simply said, you know what, the job isn't being done. You know, he's not doing the job. And when I voiced my concern to some other people and had conversations about that, I said, I understand the need for a new chair. We need someone who can actually do the job here. But when I did that, what I was met with was a lot of hostility, in that even when they did agree with me that he wasn't performing the job as necessary, they would also say, but if you don't get in line behind this leadership, you're a traitor. So from then on, I was labeled a traitor and an insurrectionist, and part of a coup, which was not a thing. I hadn't chosen sides. I'm just sticking up. I'm paying attention to the truth of what's happening and what I'd like to see. And what I'd like to see is people elected to or in positions who are qualified for those positions. I want to see them doing their actual job. And that started to become apparent. And right when that whole debacle came down with the chair issue, and we were voting in for new chairs, so then I started to pay attention to the rules, the bylaws, everything else. Third district at that time did not have any bylaws. We were working on some. It's funny because in the span of about 2 to 3 months, we went um, from one meeting saying we don't need any bylaws, you know, it's not a big deal, to the very next month saying, well, here's our first draft of the bylaws. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So obviously I want to read them. Several of us took interest in them. We saw some errors, we saw some concerning things. You know, we went to the one and only bylaws meeting that they actually made known to the rest of us. Pretty much shot down any corrections or any suggestions that were made during that. We were really concerned about giving the power and authority to the chair, which it doesn't belong. We were concerned about the very low quorum that they were trying to establish, because that's a dangerous territory when you have to, I don't know, vote people on, vote people off, and whatnot. Quorum was another issue. And then it snowballed into more things added, like no recordings. And now I totally see the understanding and understand the need for recording meetings and recording things like this, because you have to be held accountable to what you're saying and doing. And it's concerning those people who don't understand that, and who think that being held accountable to what they've said and what they've done is a problem. Um, Anyhow, shortly after that, go ahead.
No, I just said absolutely. I'm just agreeing with you.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Continue.
So shortly after that, it was so much going on at once, but you could see that you could start to see some things unfolding with state level stuff. And you know, we're talking about people who are involved in every single level of this. You know, we have the same people who are on state committee, the same people who are in District 3, the same people who are in Kent County. And you start to see the same behaviors, and you start to see things trickle down. And it's a very, very power hungry, control gripping type of energy just moving through the entire party. And so you start to sit up and take notice, and you want to make sure things are being done correctly and by the rules, and that people are being honest. And when you start to point those things out, you start to get ridiculed for it. You start to get persecuted for it. It's crazy to me that the reason that they voted me off of the District 3 committee, two, there were 3 people who got up and read pages and pages of insults and blatant lies about myself, my character, things like that. 2 of the people I had never even had a conversation with before, ever. So the fact that they were reading pages about who I was very interesting to me, because I didn't even know who they were. And one person in particular who did, who I had conversations with before, had since labeled me a traitor and an insurrectionist, and labeled me all kinds of names before that, just because of my views and my honest opinion on certain things happening in the party. But the reasons that they gave, and I quote unquote reasons, were that I was essentially guilty by association, in that I was conspiring with known disruptors in the party. Um, Basically saying, you're part of this group, you chose a side, you're part of a coup, you're a disruptor because we know these other disruptors, so because you associate with them, you're part of the problem, right? So that was one. Another was being part of a toxic public chat, which, by the way, I'm not part of any public chats. I don't even do social media. I'm not on social media for a reason. My household doesn't do that. I am in private chats with a very real purpose. And because they don't like what's being said on those chats, they deem that as toxic. Now, I still have yet to have called anyone out by name, or use horrible tactics like name calling and all kinds of stuff that's actually been done to me. I haven't lashed out and retaliated in that way. And yet I've been deemed toxic and part of these toxic chats. What they don't like is the things that I have done in those chats is call out what's happening, what the behaviors are. And I will continue to do that because I think that it's constructive and I think it's honest, and we need to be held accountable to it. And the third reason, if you will, for being voted off was being part of and helping out a newly formed PAC, which they thought was in direct conflict and also pulling away from the GOP and all of their work. And and I'm sorry, I laugh because it's been over a year and I just don't see a lot of work being done in the GOP. I don't see a lot of necessary things like fundraising coming out of there. I don't see the things that we need to see. It's, again, it goes back to the job position. Are you doing your job? Are you qualified for your job? And I could say this at every single level. I think that's what we found at state level. You know, it's been over a year. You hadn't done your job. That's why you were voted out. It's been like, this is exactly what's happening at every single level. And this is why we are where we are today. We're almost rendered ineffective at this point because we're in a huge election season and we're not even prepared for it. And that is just embarrassing. It's embarrassing to take that information back to my precinct and my neighborhood and everything. I want to make sure that they feel confident that we're prepared to go into this election season. And I don't even feel confident in that way. Now, because I did choose to help with that PAC, and that PAC was Red Pilled Michigan, and formed because it was such an ineffective events and fundraising going on in the Kent County Party. So they continued to do the work and went outside of that just to get the work done. And I believe in that. You know, the work has to be done. If it's not going to be done here, it's going to be done somewhere else. And I want to be part of doing the actual work. That's why I got involved in the first place. I'm not another sheep that's just going to toe the line and vote how you want me to and not say a word. And I'm just not going to do that. I want to make sure that I'm doing this for a reason and I'm actually being effective. So this PAC is effective, and we've had some very successful events and continuing to have more. And it's very exciting because it's a positive atmosphere. We're actually getting things done, but they don't like that because they think that's in direct conflict, which is sad because we could have been doing the same things for them. You know, they kicked all of us out, not just me, kicked all of us out of the events and fundraising committee. I was kicked out of the grassroots committee. I was kicked out of the PR committee. I was kicked off of several chats, you know, voted off of D3, and all because I'm just trying to do what I can do for the right reasons and in the right ways. But because it's not 100% aligned with the certain people who are very much at the top and very power hungry and in control and very controlling, they don't want that. It's sad. It's just sad that the party is the way it is. You know, I talk to people who have been veterans at this or who have been around a lot longer, and they tell me, you know, politics has been like this forever. This party has been this way forever. And I keep thinking, has it? Because it seems like more of a mess now. I mean, I don't know. I haven't been involved as long, but it does seem like more of a mess now, inter-party, inside our own party than it ever has been before. But I don't know. I don't know for sure.
Well, I think
Scott, one thing I wanted Cindy to speak to that she brought to our attention was the bylaws development and how the District 3 bylaws accidentally had Kent County GOP in the bylaws.
Oh, it wasn't just that. It wasn't just that either. When they first presented the bylaws, it did say Kent County on it. It's like they were already designed. And it's funny because I remember going to a Kent GOP meeting and they actually admitted that the whole bylaws process was a state down effort. Like they developed these bylaws at state level, and they wanted to really conform all of the districts and all of the counties into the same. They just wanted everyone to conform to it. And then it became clear when we started seeing not only the bylaws at District 3 that would say Kent County on them, but also when they voted to remove Robert's rules and they wanted to install the parliamentary procedure, 5-page procedure, that also said Kent County on it. So every time something would happen at District 3, I would go back to Kent County and say, well, guess what's coming down the line? And sure enough, within a month or two, is the same stuff, the same exact stuff, same bylaws, same parliamentary procedures, same everything.
Yep. Yeah.
And a lot of that is because it's the same people.
Right.
The same people who are controlling the party are in both District 3 and in Kent County.
Right. And so, or who were supporting the party, or who were running the party. So you're talking about people that are close to. They're basically lieutenants in Christina Caramo's operation and Mike Labity's operation, and that would include Anna Camp, Anna Timmer, Angela Gillespie. Who else that is in Kent County specifically that is in?
Well, correction. Anna Camp is a precinct delegate, but she was not on the EC. She was not. To my knowledge, she's not on District 3. Stephanie and Cindy can correct me on that. But I will tell you that she was meeting behind the scenes with Tim Wallinga and Angela Gillespie in every single meeting that they had, and they didn't include me, the treasurer, oddly enough, in all of those meetings, which was really, really interesting.
Yeah, and it's also, it would be interesting to know. Billy Joe says was Dan Bonamy a part of this? I kind of doubt it, just because he's so far north. But who knows? He may have been party to the conversations. I mean, he was. Christina made him her co-chair illegitimately on towards the end of February before the temporary injunction. But who knows to what extent there was actually more coordination there.
I can speak to some of the similarities in the names between 3rd District and Kent as well. Last July and August at the 3rd District meetings, when we would have a state level update at our 3rd District meeting, Dan Kuhl was still our chair at that time. And we had a very awkward meeting in August. Cindy would probably be able to speak to this also, but we had a little encounter because Matt Johnson, who was on the 3rd District, was asked to give an update about the budget committee for the state committee member. Mm-hmm. And let's see, how did this go? Because he had recently been voted off. So John Shout was trying to give an update. John is the current chair of the Kent GOP, but he's on 3rd District. He's also a state committee man. He is also on the state budget committee. And Matt was trying to get some answers from John because John was being extremely tight-lipped about budget at that time because everyone knew that Christina was failing and she was not being transparent about the finances. And I have this recorded. that John was asked for some specific details about budget and finance. Matt was the one particularly grilling him because he had been voted off and obviously had a reason to want to know. And John said, I'm not going to tell you that. I'm not going to tell you anything about, updates with budget and finance. He said, I work for Christina. So that was very eye-opening for me. That's for me when I started to kind of see these connections with state level and realizing that Matt was voted off because he was seeking transparency with the budget and finances at the state level. And soon after, I found out that John Shout had worked hard to get Matt removed from the budget committee at state level. So it's not like I've known these people forever. This was just, last August for me. Then what happened with the bylaws at the third.
Before you move on,
yeah,
Stephanie, that what you just said is just a really, really big deal. So, when did that happen?
When was that stated?
When did they remove Matt?
Was that must have been July. Last July.
So they removed
our August meeting that he had freshly.
Yeah, that was early on.
So did they remove him from the county or the district?
Matt was still on our district level. He's not been on our Kent County, but he's a state committee man.
So they removed him from the district before they removed him from the state?
No.
Okay.
No.
But it was.
I don't know if he resigned. Cindy, do you know that?
I think he.
It's been hard to keep up because several of the people who I had been talking with and trying to stay informed with, because, you can't go to the meetings and you can't get any information about the meetings. Anyway, have since resigned and left because they have seen the whole rules for thee, not for me approach coming down the line, and they're just done. They're just done with it. So a lot of people have resigned. So I have no idea what's going on with District 3 at this point.
So I will tell you that Matt Johnson was removed from as the budget MIGOP budget chair.
Yeah.
And John Schutt proudly stated that he was responsible for having Matt Johnson removed.
Yeah.
Wow.
So then 3rd District bylaws start. We had a bylaws meeting set for, this must have been September. And Cindy and I and a few others had been in contact. We had gotten a copy of a draft that was written up by one of the attorneys on our 3rd District, Greg Todd, had worked hard to write up a draft bylaws. I don't know who else helped him, or we didn't at the time. The day we were supposed to have our first bylaws meeting, we got an email saying that it was the final draft bylaws. And Cindy and I and a few others were bothered by that because we were like, final draft? We haven't even had a meeting yet. How can this be? So I had the cojones to ask in an email. I asked our entire EC. I said, what's going on here? I wasn't even aware that we had a meeting yet. Who's working on this? Who's behind this? And it was crickets. So I started texting and calling that day. A few of the members who I thought might possibly have some information. I reached out to Lance Griffin, who is the treasurer for the 3rd District. He's also on the Kent EC. I reached out to, he told me that, yes, there were meetings. And I said, well, who wrote these final? He said, well, John Shout was huge in, kind of making a lot of these edits and changes. And he did ask for the voices of certain people to be involved. And I said, what in the world? Why weren't all of us asked? Last I checked, I was an EC member. And he said, Stephanie, and I have this in writing as well. He said, it doesn't matter who attended. It just matters what the outcome was. And I thought, what are you talking about, Lance? So his focus was that I was butthurt that I wasn't invited to these meetings, when that's not the case at all. I mean, yes, I was butthurt, but it's because we should all have a voice. So Cindy and I, Alexa, Adi, a few others, we we worked hard. We spent hours going through the draft bylaws because we planned to come to the meeting prepared with proposed changes and edits. I had reached out to John Shout that afternoon. I texted him and I emailed him and I called him and I just said, could we please touch base? I've been hearing that you're kind of the one behind the scenes on this, and I would just like to chat with you. It was crickets. He did not respond to any of my efforts. I had called Peggy Dornboss that day as well, who is on the 3rd District. She's also a state committee woman. And she had voiced some of her concerns about budget transparency at the state level. So I thought maybe she would see how some of these connections have taken place. So I called her and we had a really odd conversation. She admitted that she was part of the meetings for the bylaws, where only certain members were invited. And lo and behold, that was Chip Netzel and his wife, Stephanie. He is now the chair of the 3rd District. And then obviously John Shout, Lance, Jenny Hendricks is a Kent EC. She's the vice chair of the 3rd District and also on the Kent EC. So you see a lot of these similarities. And Peggy went off on a tangent, talking to me, spreading rumors to me about our chair at the time, Dan Cool, because I said I've also been hearing rumors that there's a group of people that want to remove Dan as our chair. And she said, yeah, they want to remove him. I don't understand why. She said, I don't agree with their reasoning, but he is 420. And I said, what? And she said, well, I'm 420 too. Are you 420? And I said, what's 420? And she said, well, that means, she said, I got in a car accident and I'm medicated on marijuana because I'm 420 24/7 is what she said. She said, but I'm medicated. I know how to dose. Dan doesn't know how to dose because he is not medicated. He just does it recreationally. And that's why he keeps screwing up as chair. And I was like, Peggy, what are you talking about? I said, anyway, it just came so out of the blue for me. So I said, I'm not sure that, spreading rumors like that is the right thing to do. I was more focused on these private bylaws meetings that were taking place, and she really didn't seem to care about that either. So I went back and I emailed the rest of the EC, and I kind of outed some of them. I just said, I've spoken with, quite a few people today who seem to know about these private meetings, and I'm upset. And I told them about my conversation with Peggy, how she was trying to spread rumors about Dan Cool, our chair. And I said, I do not, I don't agree with that. If people want to remove him for, breaking the rules or laws or whatever, that's another story. But whoa, she flew off the handle when I brought that up. And she was like, that is not, you're telling lies. That's toxic, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, I could check my recording, but I'm pretty sure that's what happened in that conversation. So then she got mad because I alluded to the fact that I had recorded that conversation. So she said, I'm making a motion tonight to remove Stephanie Boone from the 3rd District for being toxic. And Lance Griffin responded and said that he doesn't agree with that unless there's a motion to suspend the rules. So he was giving her the thought, you need to suspend the rules first and then remove a member. So at the next meeting, that's exactly what they did. They voted to suspend Robert's rules, which is actually illegal to do that when you are going to remove a minority, because it removed my rights. And they removed me. I came to the meeting. Peggy got right up in my face, hand in my face, and called me white trash and said that, I have no business recording. I'm a toxic individual. And I just stood my ground. I said,
Oh no, we lost you, Stephanie.
I apologize that the truth bothers you, but you are not going to stop me from exposing the truth. And they removed me. it was illegitimate. Dan Kuhl tried to fight back on that, and he actually ended up resigning that night in support of me and the fact that what they had done was completely wrong. I reached out to Matt DePerno, and he made a phone call to Greg Todd, who's an attorney who's actually running for Ottawa County prosecutor now. And somehow he was able to make Greg understand that what they did was completely wrong. So at the next meeting, they reinstated me, like I said earlier, and then they quickly voted to, when you show up with the rules and the laws, they don't like that much. So when they have a majority, they can just go ahead and vote and make changes however they want and do what they need to do. So that's how that happened.
So, and then
That's been a big learning experience for sure.
And
with the understanding, reading the bylaws at every level. I mean, we started to do that on District 3.
Hear me?
And we can hear you.
I can hear you. Yep. So on District 3, when we started to pay attention to the bylaws, we wanted to make sure that any errors, and here's how crazy it was. I pick out spelling errors. That's why I was trying to do editing.
Go ahead, Cindy. I just muted Stephanie. She can't hear us. She's going to back. Go ahead.
Okay. So I would try to pick out spelling errors, grammatical errors in the bylaws, because I have a knack for catching some of that stuff. And even when I would present that, just the fact that I was presenting something at these meetings, this needs to be fixed. We can't adopt the bylaws. Why we can't vote them in if they're not even ready to go yet? They're not approved. They're not even written correctly. That was voted down and shouted out and gavelled down, and even when I had the support from the attorney on the committee, who also understood the fact that one little word, if it's not correct, can change the whole meaning of an entire sentence. That's why it's so important to get this right. Even he agreed with me. Some people stood up and took notice of that. But still, it was just shoved through and pushed through. Let's just vote them in and adopt them anyway. And the bylaws were just a mess. And I don't know if they've cleaned them up since, if they've added things to them, but that's when bylaws started becoming important to me. And I'm an avid reader. I do love reading, but for those who don't, I can understand how daunting this task can be to actually comb through bylaws for an organization. It's not the most fun thing to read, but it is interesting and it's very informative. And when everything happened for the January 6th meeting for voting out Christina, I was interested. I thought, you know what? I keep hearing all things from all different sides and I want to know the truth. So I'm going to read through them myself. And I did. I combed through everything. I asked questions to people. I had to make sure that I had the right understanding of what they meant and what was being said and everything. And when it's true and you follow the laws, you just have to deal with it. And that's the problem we're facing right now, is people are just so high strung on emotion. And I get that you have feelings and responses to things like this. I get it. But we also have to follow the rules. We have to follow law and order. That's our party platform. And more, I just keep seeing people veer away from our party platform. And it's very concerning. Because what are we? What is our party then?
Yeah, I want to get to some questions here real quick. Those are really, really good points. And I think, Cindy, what you said about the importance of reading the bylaws and knowing the rules is absolutely critical. And that's what we need in delegates. And if you really look at what is it that caused them, at least those that are on the higher level that are making these decisions to remove people, when we look at every state that I've looked at, it's the same exact thing. Their intention is to remove the people who are most effective, most connected, and most productive from the party. They want a completely ineffective, broken, conflicted, emotional, victim-oriented party that they can have absolute dictatorial power over. And it sounds absolutely crazy, but all of the evidence points to that being the truth. And everything that you guys have shared today confirms that. I
never wanted to believe that, but I agree with you, Scott.
Right. I mean, it's a terrible thing. I didn't believe this when I started going into it. I absolutely, and for over a month, I didn't want to believe it. But the evidence is just overwhelming. This is an operation nation, because it's happening in such a coordinated way in every state, that it's the same exact thing. This isn't just like some freak people, lone wolves here in Michigan that are doing this, or in Kent County. It doesn't matter if you zoom in on the county level, the district level, zoom all the way out. And my concern is that it's even happening in the RNC level. So,
you're describing liberals. You're describing the emotional left. And so unfortunately, this is a movement to try to turn our state and other states and our nation left. That's what it is. I have told these people in the Republican Party this past year, it's the weirdest thing, because prior to that, I thought we were all united fighting against the leftist school boards and the leftist, members on the boards of commissioners and councils and you name it. And I very quickly learned that they're doing the exact same thing. We are just split into a smaller faction, battling people who claim to be Republicans and are not.
That's right. Of course, as we never found out how Otsego County spent the money. This is happening in so many. It's every county in which the people who are close to Christina Caramo and therefore Mike Labadie are in control, and that they do the same stuff. It happens to be.
Scott. Hey, Scott, I'll add to that.
Yeah.
Back in January of last year, before our first executive committee meeting for the Kent County GOP, I reached out to Tim Wallinga, the chair at the time, and I said, "Hey, do you want me to give a treasurer's report for where the body stands?" We had a big fundraiser in January, and we had raised a lot of money, and I was hopeful at the time. And he said, "No, I don't want to give any financial reports." And it was really weird. The day of the executive committee meeting, he reaches out to me. He said, "Okay, I want you to give a treasurer's report, but this is all I want you to share." I'm like, okay, I had already made up a treasurer's report because I'm used to doing that because I'm treasurer for a number of organizations, which they then held against me, saying I had a conflict of interest. I'm like, how do I have a conflict of interest? Very early on, the first week in January, we were required to sign a non-disclosure agreement that we would not share any donor information outside of the Kent County GOP, which I was fine with. My background, actually, my corporate background, I was in intellectual property licensing. So I had signed literally dozens of non-disclosure agreements, and I didn't have a problem with that because I had no intention of sharing our internal financials with outside of the party. But it's kind of interesting. They wanted my experience as a treasurer, but they didn't want me because supposedly I had a conflict of interest. In fact, one of the EC members texted me on April 15th, I remember this, and said they were going to make a motion to have me removed because of conflicts of interest. Even though I had explained to this member, I have a non-disclosure agreement with the Kent County GOP not to share any of our financial information outside of the party. And so it's that whole distrust thing that we've talked about was endemic in the Kent County GOP. And there was a lot of, our treasurer is going to be the problem. And I was told this by members of the faction who are removing members now, that the chair at the time had told them on multiple occasions that I was the problem, even though I was just trying to bring organization and transparency and accountability to the process. And they didn't want that. It was very clear that the chair, who was tight with Christina Caramo, I can go back to that because I went to a state committee meeting in December in Frankenmuth the year before, and our chair at the time was sitting with Christina Caramo and talking to her the entire time. It was clear that they were very close and they were organizing. Mm-hmm. So my background goes back, and I knew about Mike Labadie actually in December before the Christina Caramo was elected as chair of the MIGOP. One of the members on her Secretary of State team had reached out to me and wanted to talk to me about Mike Labadie and how she was recruited by Mike Labadie, and was told that by Mike Labadie that she could not talk to anyone else, but he wasn't part of the Caramo campaign. It was very, very unusual. And I actually reached out to, well, Christy Claimer, who was with Christina for 18 months, like every day. And she confirmed everything that this individual had told me.
Yeah. Yeah. So Trump 24 asked a really, really interesting question that has been kind of at the back of my head for for a few weeks. Why is Representative Neil Frisky, who represents Northern Michigan, always in Kent County, which isn't even a part of his district and it's even hours away from it? Do you guys have any insight into that? Have you seen him?
Could say that about a lot of different characters. Why are they all hanging out in Kent County?
Right.
I've seen a lot of people who aren't part of Kent County who are here constantly at our meetings and stuff.
Right. So that's just one of those questions that the question itself is provocative. So the random stuff in Michigan said the former Kent County vice chair said she resigned because Anna Camp and Angela Gillespie were controlling Tim Wengler behind the scenes.
I can confirm that. So Katie DeBoer, once Angela Gillespie resigned as vice chair because it was exposed that she was actually the MIGOP secretary and had a conflict of interest, Katie DeBoer was elected, and this was kind of a point of contention. Stephanie remembers this. We were told on a Friday before our Monday morning EC meeting that we were going to be electing a new vice chair. And Katie she's a Kent County commissioner, homeschool mom. She runs a homeschool co-op, total conservative, has been her whole time. But now she was a rhino because she's a county commissioner, right? It's so funny, the labeling that happens. I mean, I've been a grassroots guy my entire life, literally for decades. And to be called a rhino and a traitor and everything else, I think is just hilarious because these people obviously don't know me or know my background. I've been fighting with Stephanie and Cindy the whole time and many others in the movement. I mean, we fought against all the mandates, the lockdowns. We actually supported a restaurant, me and a group of people. You might know about Marlena from Holland, the pizza place.
Right.
We were I was like one of the first people to go down there and have lunch with her and said, we need to start supporting her. And I was the one who actually spearheaded that whole movement to set up a fundraiser for her to help her out in the legal challenges she was facing. I mean, I've been at this my whole life, and for these people to call me a traitor and a rhino and all the establishment or whatever they call me, I don't really care because it's just meaningless to me. It doesn't mean anything.
Well, they use it
hilarious.
The same way as the left uses the term racist or white supremacist, or whatever. It's the same exact method. It's the same psychological reasons. That it's a method of the left.
Well, all of these tactics are.
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
All of the tactics that they use, the name calling, they're projecting all of the same things that the left actually does, the same stuff, which I found really interesting. I'm like, you're name calling, you're slandering, you're accusing, you're using fear, you're using all of the tactics of the enemy and projecting it on us, but we're not guilty of that. Some of us are just like, how that doesn't stick. I'm sorry, but that does not stick. And why are you doing that anyway? That's not our party. We should be embracing each other's differing opinions and differences. We all have so many unique and special talents and gifts to add to this party and this whole movement. If we would just accept people and learn how to work with people instead of shutting everyone out and kicking people off and this and that and the other, we could have been so much further by now and more prepared for this election season. And I can't tell you how many times I've stood up in front of committees, and I've said this on Telegram and what have you. There are many people who I don't necessarily like, and I don't agree with the way that they've been behaving. But I'd rather call that out and see an adjustment there and figure out how to work with them. I'm not one for voting anybody off a committee. You were elected to be here, and it doesn't matter how I feel about you. I'd rather try to find a way to work with you than try to vote you off a committee. So that's what we should be focusing on, is working together.
Oh, Cindy.
Yeah, I think we all felt like that.
I just said, let's talk about the campaign finance violations a little bit there. Cindy and I, well, Tom, Nick Prill, many members have tried over the past year plus to call errors, omissions, mistakes, whatever it might be, to the attention of those on the committees that or subcommittees that are in charge of events and fundraising. And because we've all learned, most of us through experience, that there are laws that you must follow for reporting and for labeling different items related to campaign finance. And in a chat since the beginning of the 3rd district, Cindy and I, in our 3rd district, I think it was a Telegram chat, the one we got kicked out of, we were trying to just say, hey, this flyer looks awesome for this event, except it doesn't have the proper disclaimers on it. Can we get that fixed? Or it has a spelling error, or it just, can we help out? And each time we would try to do that, those in charge would get more and more frustrated with us. We were toxic for calling out, and we were trying to do it in the most constructive way possible, not being disrespectful, just saying, hey, would you like a second pair of eyes on this? Because we need to make sure we get this right. And that frustrated the vice chair of the 3rd district enough to the point where she removed Cindy and I from the chat. We were considered negative, blood-sucking, do-nothing Republicans because we called out errors or omissions. Those are in quotes. And we did arrange for a meeting with Jenny after the fact because it was very apparent she had some issues with us. We both met with her for a private meeting where Jenny did admit to a lot of different things in that meeting. I thought that we had a good discussion about, okay, she basically admitted she was allowing a lot of the Kent GOP frustrations to trickle into the 3rd district. She was very, very worried that the same things that were happening, or she perceived were happening at the county level, were going to start happening at the district level as well. And all I mean by that is, I guess she was worried that people were going to hold them accountable to the rules and laws, policies. So, the more we all got involved in learning Robert's rules and learning the processes, we all bought Robert's rules books. We tried our best to come prepared to meetings and hold ourselves accountable as well. And the more we tried to do that, the more these people pushed back and said we were weaponizing the rules against them. No, we were simply trying to ask them to be accountable to the rules just as we have to be as well. And it got to the point where I had reached out to Lance Griffin, Jenny Hendricks about my specific concerns related to campaign finance. This went on for months. And Lance, at one point in text, told me that at this point, the only person who would cause any trouble for us related to campaign finance would be a Republican trying to cause trouble. So I wound up filing a campaign finance violation complaint against Jenny Hendricks and Lance Griffin related to their errors and omissions within the 3rd district, because it was so bad that I was worried about liability for those of us who were trying to call out these mistakes and errors. And because the 3rd district was not incorporated at the time, liability falls on every member. So, I had found that they held a Kentucky Derby event, the first fundraiser we had, where there was a silent auction, there was money spent on decorations, a venue, food. There was at least $3,000 raised at that meeting because we have that in writing. Yet none of that was recorded or properly documented in the campaign finance statements. None of it, not the expenses or the donations. So that's a problem. And I don't want to be liable for that.
Right. So, and then,
Scott, can I add to that a little bit?
Sure.
So this is the problem with having a treasurer who doesn't understand Michigan Campaign Finance Act, who doesn't know who doesn't know MERTS, which is the system to file your campaign finance reports. I early on, when I caught wind of some of the stuff going on in 3rd District, I would talk to Lance Elliott Griffin, who's on 3rd District, also on the Kent County EC, and I would say, look, you cannot have money going into someone's private Venmo account, which is Jennifer Hendricks' private Venmo account. I said, you can't do that. You need to set up a separate bank account. Well, as it turns out, I was at a coffee hour in July of 2023, and Lance pulled me aside and he said, hey, can I talk to you about some campaign finance stuff? And we had been conversing back and forth, and I'd basically been sharing the campaign finance laws with him. Here's what you need to follow, trying to get him to get things straightened out. And he mentioned this to me, that the fundraiser that they did, and he had a number of concerns that Jennifer Hendricks had collected all this money from that fundraising event. And he asked me, he said, what do I need from this? And I said, do you have the name of all the people who bought tickets or donated to this event? And he said, no. I said, can you get that from the Venmo account? Can you ask Jennifer for that information? And he said, well, okay, I'll see if I can get that information. I'm paraphrasing here. It was a lot more. There was a lot more discussion about it. But then I look on the campaign finance report, and all he reports is a $1,400 donation from Jennifer Hendricks. It doesn't show the individual donors, which is the exact same problem that Dinesh D'Souza ran into when he gave money to his friends and had them donate that money to the party. So you're basically hiding who the donors are to the party, and that's a direct violation of the Michigan Campaign Finance Act. You can't do that.
Right.
And that's a problem. I mean, there were other problems too. I mean, the disclaimer issue, what we call an identifier in Michigan Campaign Finance Act, you need to identify the name of the organization. And of course, in his response, apparently, to the Bureau of Elections, he said, well, this was a private party, so we didn't have to disclose that. No, that's not true either. Mm-hmm. If you're raising money for the party, for the 3rd District, which is a political campaign committee, let's be honest, you have to disclose that information on where that money is going. That's part of the disclosure, part of Michigan Campaign Finance Act. Anyone who's involved in Michigan and campaign finance understands that, which is why, and I will give Lance credit. He reached out to me frequently, and he boldly admits that he reached out to me because I'm knowledgeable in this field, which is a very niche field, by the way. There's very few people who actually understand Michigan Campaign Finance Act. In my experience with other campaigns, with campaign committees, and with other political action committees, brought that to the table that, you know what, I'm experienced, I'm knowledgeable, I know what's going on. So you need to follow these laws. And if I don't know the answer, I speak to the Bureau of Elections all the time. And of course, then they accuse that, well, the Bureau of Elections is a bunch of Democrats. Well, it's not. Let's be honest. These are, these people, every time I've talked to them, they've been professional. They know I'm with the Republican Party. They answer my questions. They're civil servants, and they have shown no animus towards innocent questions.
Yeah. Yeah, and that this pattern of rejecting and refusing and avoiding whatever it may be, financial transparency, and the legal disclosures. It almost seems like, especially we saw that with the state party, filing a few days late, and there's so many red flags in there. It almost seems like they're trying to get the party into trouble with campaign finance stuff. And that's there was, in Arizona, there was a state committee meeting over the weekend, and it was a closed meeting for the first time. I was told in years that they've had a closed meeting. Normally they're open to all delegates that can attend and guess. And there was no financial report. And also they voted to sell the business, or the building, their headquarters building. And, which obviously rhymes with what's happened here in Michigan, where Christina Karamo sued the trust that owned or that owns the state headquarters to try to sell it. And I think that there's something similar here. We've had so many comments, and but there was a question, and I am sorry, I know it was from Heather, but I can't find it, about the headquarters building. And is there, because I just saw a post,
I can speak to that if you want, Scott.
Sure. Just to set it up, I just saw a post that said that they're looking for space, but as I understand it, there is a building that is owned in trust for the use of the party, and all they have to do is pay utilities.
So, not necessarily true. There was more to it than that. I will say that there was no interest in the new party, if you will, the newly elected party, in being in the building downtown, the 725 Lake Michigan Drive Northeast building. That had been the traditional location for the Kent County GOP. What happened in August of last year was the former chair, Rob Verheulen, once he realized that he was no longer going to be chair, and I saw this, and this is one of the reasons I was so excited, is, hey, we're throwing out 40 years of establishment in the Kent County GOP, right? Well, what they did was interesting. Rob Verheulen did a sleight of hand. He basically took all of the assets of the Kent County GOP and he put it into a new trust that was created back in August of 22, once he found out that he was no longer going to be chair. And basically that trust said, if you want to use the building, you need to come to us, the three trustees, which was interesting because the former ambassador, Peter Secchia, had basically given $50,000 to the Kent County GOP back in 1985 in his trust, and basically gave them 5 years to find a building, a permanent place location for the Kent County GOP. They did this. They actually bought that building back in the 80s, and it became part of the GOP, Kent County GOP. Well, my frustration was, I've been a pretty major donor to the Kent County GOP for years, and my money was invested in that building. Bought a lot of the infrastructure, the TV sets, the tables, the chairs, the copier, all of that stuff came out of the donor's money. And all of a sudden, this private trust now controls that building. Part of the way that there was a handshake agreement between the Secchia Trust and the Kent County GOP, whereby the Kent County GOP would pay the trust for use of that building. It was roughly $200,000 a year. And then in return, the trust would make a donation to the Kent County GOP for $200,000. So it was basically a wash. Well, that all ended when this new trust was created, and the building and all of the assets within the building were put into this private trust, and you had to seek approval from the trustees, the three trustees for that new trust, in order to use that building. Well, part of the issue was that the Kent County GOP would rent out space, offices in that building to candidates to offset or defray the costs that were associated, the monthly costs that were associated with maintenance, with upkeep, with taxes. All of the things that go into that building were offset by utilization or by renting out space to candidates in that office, because there were multiple smaller offices that were available in that building. Well, that trust basically said, no, that revenue is going to come to the trust, and you, the new Kent County GOP, don't have any rights to it. Oh, and by the way, you only get use of half the building, and you have to pay us, I think it started at $6,000 a month. And we were responsible for all, again, I wasn't intimately involved in these negotiations, but this is what the former chair shared with me. Started at like $6,000 a month, and then it went down to like $3,000 a month. There was negotiations going on in January, back and forth. And I told the chair at the time, I said, you know what, the new GOP doesn't care about that building. We kind of had a feeling we were going to lose that anyway. What's interesting is we started holding our meetings at this location in Grand Rapids, that one of the EC members was a member of. And it was supposed to be free, but I came to find out that it wasn't free. They were taking donations to offset the cost of this building. And then in the, I believe it was the July 23 executive committee meeting, Joel Studebaker, who at the time was Christina Caramel's chief of staff, and in Ottawa, he's former chair of Ottawa County, as you know, came in as a guest and was literally shouting at any EC member who stood up to ask a question, a point of information, point of parliamentary inquiry. He was shouting at them to sit down and shut up, literally. And then he got into a shouting match with one of the members, and I don't remember who, in the hallway, which ended up getting us kicked out of that venue. So we, the same time, 10 days later, the former chair resigned, and we were without a building. We were without a place to meet, and we were scrambling as an organization. So I set up a special meeting because the chair illegally, the former chair illegally, took a vote to remove our vice chair, Katie DeBoer, when she had requested a withdrawal of her resignation because Tim, the former chair, was preparing to resign. So instead, and the funny thing is the parliamentarian, if you know Ralph Revant, came in and actually said, no, she has the right to withdraw under Robert's rules. And yet the former chair, Tim Wallinga, said, no, we're going to take a vote to remove her. So it's like they violated the rules constantly to get their will. And I think it was one vote that made the difference. And so our vice chair, who would have stepped in to be chair, Katie DeBoer, was removed as the chair, as the vice chair. Mm-hmm. Well, again, 10 days later, Tim Wallinga resigns. And so I scheduled August 15th, I scheduled a unity special meeting to bring the party together. And I brought the statutory members as well as the elected members to that meeting. And I thought at the time things were going to be great. And unfortunately, the next day, one of the EC members held a anti-Katie DeBoer meeting, a faction, if you will, to basically form this voting block, a majority voting block, to basically take over the party, if you will, and enforce their will by mob rule. And that's basically where we've been facing ever since.
Yep. So it sounds like there's still a great deal of confusion around that trust, and that's probably obviously going to continue. That the current leadership feels that they have reached an impasse with the those who control the trust, and from my perspective, and not knowing a lot about the details, those who put the bulk of the money into it, they have the right to control how it's used to an extent. And if it is a resource that's available to the party, I don't know, it's a messy thing. But this is.
So, I will tell you, I will add that there was some discussion about potentially suing over that, because that wasn't the intent of the Secchia family, the Secchia Trust, originally, to have a permanent location for the Kent County GOP. My understanding is the attorneys that they spoke to said, yeah, it's slimy. Would you win in court? It's a crapshoot. Anytime you go to court over something, it's going to be a crapshoot. So the decision was made to walk away from the building, and my understanding is that they have since rented the building out. I believe Americans for Prosperity was in there for a while. I don't know if they still are or not. So that's really not an option for the party. Plus, our former chair missed out on his fundraising goals by significant amounts, and which is one of the reasons he resigned, because he had set a goal of, I believe, $250,000 for the year 2023. He didn't even raise 20% of that.
Right. So, I want to shift gears a little bit here. We've got just a few more minutes, and so Frisky we talked about how, he's spending time here, or in Kent County. And that was in the comments that was kind of drawn to Stand Up Michigan. Jason says, like Kara calling everybody deep state and wanting to send Michigan troops to southern border and feed the military industrial complex. I'm not exactly sure what he's talking about there, but Melanie says Neil Frisky and Mike Farage are good friends, and Mike Farage is with Stand Up Michigan. And so, and Tammy Clark is there in Kent County, right?
Yes.
And she pretty much runs the Kent County Stand Up Michigan.
She does now. Apparently, Mike Farage is no longer with Stand Up. That's my understanding. I honestly haven't been to a Stand Up meeting in a while, but I will tell you there were close connections between MIPF and Stand Up Michigan. In fact, there were meetings held in 2022 at Stand Up Michigan meetings and venues, and the recruitment of precinct delegates who were MIPF happened through Stand Up Michigan. And oddly enough, they're again doing the same thing this year, recruiting precinct delegates and grassroots activists to do the same thing through Stand Up Michigan. In fact, it was interesting. Recently, I received, because I'm on their email list for Stand Up, and I received 2 emails almost back to back promoting Kent County GOP events from Stand Up Michigan. And Stand Up is saying, well, we're not a political organization. That's what I've always heard.
Yep. That's a big deal. And that's something so MIPF, for those that don't know, is Michigan Precinct First. In one of my reports, it's really all about MIPF and how that was founded in February, March, April of 2021, during really shortly, almost immediately after Christina Caramo's campaign commenced. And the whole purpose that I showed that, that there's so much that shows that the whole purpose of MIPF was to get Christina Caramo into the chair position, and that they were working closely with Stand Up Michigan. Stand Up Michigan was started by Garrett Saldano, and then, from what I understand, shortly after, it really blew up. There were, I think, even more than 300,000 followers at one point on the Facebook page, and then the Facebook page Facebook actually took it down because it was so successful, and then he was building it back up. And then Ron Armstrong, who apparently spends most of his time in Arizona, but he has a horse farm in Newego. He approached Garrett, and there was this was kind of my interpretation of a podcast that I watched Garrett, where he's talking about the foundations of all this, that Ron Armstrong essentially said, you should run for office, and you're going to be too busy to run this. Kind of let me handle Stand Up Michigan. And you can still use this as a platform to promote yourself as you're running for office. And so Ron Armstrong and Tammy Clark now really run Stand Up Michigan. I don't think that Garrett Saldana has anything to do with it.
So I'll clarify one thing. There were actually Garrett Saldano and Kevin Skinner actually started it, and it was started as Citizens Against Unlawful Lockdowns, I believe, or some sort of organization like that. And that is the Facebook page that grew to 600,000 people or whatever it was before it was shut down. And then Kevin Skinner kind of, you can find his videos out there, kind of got nudged out, if you will. I don't know all the reasons behind that. Garrett probably could tell you about that, but I agree. Tammy came in, and Ron Armstrong, and they basically are running Stand Up right now. That is true.
Right. And that it is, I had some personal experience with the Stand Up chapter in Lapeer County, that they worked for months before the August 22 primary, recruiting delegates and staging a takeover of the Lapeer County party. And it was all done by the director of the county, Lapeer County Stand Up. And so, it's the same patterns that I reported on with MIPF. And that they are actively doing this. Their goal, and this is probably where we're going to kind of work towards a conclusion on this podcast, is that their goal, they are actively working to recruit as many delegates as they can in Kent County and really statewide. And Stand Up Michigan is working with the Kent GOP to do this. There is I posted a flyer that they have that's activists that they're planning on the day after the deadline. The deadline is May 7th. I think it's the day or two after the deadline. They're planning an activism training for all of their new delegates or the delegate candidates that they've got signed up. They're probably also in Kent County, and you could quickly speak to this, any of you, that my guess is that they're expanding the number of delegates that they're going to try to max out in Kent County and have as many delegate slots available as possible. And they're I have spoken with people that have told me that they are running call centers, call parties or whatever, calling not to get out the vote, not to help Josh Powell and Ron Armstrong or Ron Singer, but they are calling to recruit more delegates. And they just want as many delegate candidates as they can have so that they can have absolute control, not just over Kent County, but they're working towards the whole state. And so as I said at the very beginning, Kent County is a really crucial county. And if they can have complete control over Kent County, it's going to have a negative impact on the whole state. And so,
can I speak to that a second?
Go for it.
I just want to remind anyone who's listening here, especially today, but that is all the more reason not to back down. I beg each of you, do not back down. Do not resign from your positions. Do not crawl back under the rocks that we came from. That is exactly what they want us to do. I'm not a quitter. I know people think I'm crazy because I keep showing up to these meetings where I'm very clearly not wanted. These people file cease and desist orders against me. They have the sheriff come in and remove me from meetings, and I still show up because it's my right to be there. And I don't want to give that up. If they're going to have to, tooth and nail, remove me to try to get rid of me. I've got schools telling me you can't talk about our schools anymore, anywhere, without permission from the superintendent. I'm not allowed to speak with teachers or staff anymore. I've never done anything to threaten anyone, harm anyone. But they are that afraid of the truth getting out there. So that's my biggest takeaway. And for all of you, I've had members who literally voted me off from these committees. And when I was voted off, I said, you guys, that's fine. Do what you feel is right in your heart right now, but just know that if you ask questions, if you stand for truth and transparency, you are next on the chopping block. And it has happened to them. Like Tom, today, I appreciate you being on, but you're putting yourself in harm's way because, in the proposed bylaws for Kent County, they want to get rid of people who are willing to stand up here publicly and talk about them. So be prepared. You're probably next on the chopping block, right?
Right.
Yeah, anyone who dissents in any way.
Oh yeah, I'm prepared for it. That's okay.
Yeah, you're violating the bylaws that we started with here by speaking publicly about them. But they haven't passed yet. So
they violate their own rules all the time. That's
exactly.
And that's fine. They're a bunch of hippies.
Right. The rules don't apply to them.
Yeah.
That's the irony of all of this is that there are certain members of the Kent County GOP who have been leaking like instantaneously information from our private meetings outside of the party. And I'm sure you've heard of his name, Chuck Richard, CJ Richard. He literally will be posting slanderous, false, defamatory information about us on his Facebook page and tagging everyone he can across the state to make us look bad. That has been happening for the last 12 months. And someone or some people who are close friends of his have been doing that for 12 months. And that's the irony of all of this, is that we weren't the ones leaking this information from our EC meetings. It was other members who are now in control of the party, and now they don't want the truth getting out there, so they want to silence all of us through these unconstitutional bylaws that violate our First Amendment rights. So much for the party of the Constitution, which I think is ironic, was on the MIGOP website. Party of the Constitution, unless you want to speak the truth, then we're going to get rid of them.
Right. And this is where Adam says, we need to out recruit them. I'm really concerned because I think that the side of truth and transparency and hard work and helping people get elected, helping Republicans get elected, that side is a little bit more on their heels than these people, because all of their focus, they don't care about November. All they care about right now is May 7th. That's all they care about. And they just want as many delegates as they can. They're 100% focused on that. And that's where I think, and I'm just going to give a plug, I think Delegates for Trump is a great concept, because it's not just delegate recruitment. It's recruiting people to become delegates and simultaneously getting them involved in door knocking and making calls and helping to get Trump elected and to get Republicans elected in November. So, if you are, even if you're already a delegate, it's worth taking a look at Delegates for Trump and seeing how you can get involved. Also, it's really, we're at a critical spot right now with our state, with the state house. There, it is 50-50, it's deadlocked. And we have the opportunity to get 2 Republicans elected in a special election that's coming right up. And that's Ron Singer and Josh Powell. I've got an announcement this morning that on April 6th, there's going to be, the text says, on April 6th, we will be descending on Southeast Michigan to help with 2 special elections for this Michigan House of Representatives, Ron Singer in Warren and Josh Powell in Westland. Please consider signing up for one of these 2 races. And I'll put a link for that in the show notes. And they'll be knocking on doors. And then afterwards, there's going to be kind of a party in the middle between the districts. So this is a great way to meet other people from all over the state that want to help get Republicans elected. Probably won't see any disruptors there, so because they're not interested in that. They only want to try to strengthen their tyrannical power hold. So Melanie says, awesome interaction from so many listeners on this podcast, and that's true. There has been just great. I don't think I even showed half of the comments. There's just a lot of interaction on all 3 platforms, on Facebook, X, and YouTube. Barbie says, yep, it's the Constitution. Do you guys have any last things that you feel burning that we left out? We covered a lot of ground.
I have a comment.
Go for it.
Just that I just want to encourage people, anyone listening and anyone that you guys come in contact with, just encourage people to remember that there are so many different ways to get involved and to help the good cause and do what's right and what's necessary. It's not just the GOP. It's not just, these certain things. They're just look for other opportunities and be aware of what's happening around you, standing up for what's right, fighting for the truth. This is a tough thing to do, especially in these times. And you probably know that you're doing it as soon as you become persecuted for it. When you start to meet with that resistance, you're probably on the right track because we all know and we can all see, and we've known for, since time began, that anyone who is hell-bent on the path of power and control, and I mean, it is an unquenchable hunger. It's just they're not going to be able to quench that thirst and that hunger for power and control, which means they are not going to quit. These people are not going to stop. Yes, they're out in mass and they're trying to recruit like crazy, and that's great. My hope is that the people who are stepping up will actually seek information. They will inform themselves, and and I pray for these people to just be aware of the kind of tactics that they're seeing, and and to really just put it in perspective. Anything that's hyper emotional or that's coming at you in an attack sort of way or an accusatory sort of way or even fear based or any of that. I mean, you should know already that that's that type of spirit, that's not what you should be aligning with. Put your emotions aside. I think that it'd be a heck of a lot easier if everyone just pay attention to the truth. We can all unite around the rules. That's one good thing that we could unite around. Anyone who's trying to buck the rules or the laws or whatever as a means to their ends, that's a huge red flag. There's a lot of red flags flying out there. We just have to start noticing them and start calling them out. But don't be afraid to stand up, because the more of us that stand up and support what's right and call out the truth, the better off we're going to be.
That is really.
I would echo that. I think all of us basically have said, look, we were fighting before we were part of the Kent GOP for what's right and for what's conservative and for our kids. We've been fighting. We're not going to give up fighting. And I'm part of a number of organizations that are. In fact, I'm part of Delegates for Trump. So I am going to be fighting for what's right and for what's transparent and what's for integrity. You can. The funny thing is, Red Pilled Michigan PAC was actually started by two of our EC members because they had worked for months on a Lincoln Day dinner that the former chair, Tim Wallinga, had basically walked away from. And in my humble opinion, he undermined it because he wouldn't make decisions. He wouldn't come to a conclusion. Lincoln Day dinners typically in any county party are their biggest fundraiser of the year. And so I negotiated with the former chair of the events and fundraising subcommittee to postpone that Lincoln Day dinner for a couple of months to give us a chance to get speakers lined up. And the two ladies who started Red Pilled Michigan were part of that events and fundraisers. They're phenomenal patriots. They're phenomenal conservatives who want to do the right thing and wanted to raise money for the Kent County GOP. And then without even talking to them, and mind you, they had worked on venues, they had worked on vendors set up for this event. He basically just canceled the event without even talking to them and left all of these vendors hanging. And they didn't want to leave the vendors hanging. So they said, look, we'll take this on and run this event ourselves and raise the money and give that money to conservatives running for office, which is exactly what they're doing. And I encourage them to do that. And there's many organizations out there, Brighter Michigan PAC, Community Party PAC, Delegates for Trump. We're raising money for conservatives, which is conservative Republicans, which is the goal of the party and should be the goal of the party. Unfortunately, many of these county parties think it's about something completely different. They don't believe in raising money for conservative candidates, but that is the purpose of the party. And they think anyone who's an elected official or ran for office is now a rhino and they can't be trusted and they can't be, and that's such a terrible take. Because many of our elected Republicans, we may not agree with them 100%. I'm not going to agree with my spouse 100% of the time. But these people have the same goals, same conservative values, and yet they're labeled as rhinos and establishment and terrible people. Now, are there establishment people? Absolutely. And I was all on board with throwing out that establishment, and I was championed for that a year ago. But now I'm the enemy and I'm a rhino because I speak the truth and I want what's best for the state and for our county and for our districts.
Yep. Yeah. And I would argue that what has occurred and what's replaced the establishment is likely worse, because they're trying to make it so that you can't replace them. So we will, I think there are, this is really great. We've got, please, like Adam said here with Rescue Michigan, please hit the like button, please subscribe, go to my Substack. It's biggertruth.substack.com. On Wednesday, I'm going to start doing a weekly podcast for subscribers only. So please do subscribe. Your help is tremendously appreciated. I'm so grateful for everyone that has subscribed and that is allowing me to make this my full-time endeavor. We've got there's so much more to cover that I feel like I'm just at the tip of the iceberg still and what's going on. And so thank you all. This has been really great. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Tom, for being here. And thank you all for joining us in the chat.
Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Don't lose your why.
Yep.
Yeah.